One of the major things the Overlord anime tends to leave behind is the extremely comprehensive world building that goes into the New World. There's a lot of information that helps develop the other nations and the people within them, which more often than not gets left behind to instead focus on Ainz and Nazarick. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does take away from a major element of the story. One that really ties into Ainz's master plan, as well as adds a lot to the mystery behind what this new world is. So, just like how we did last week, let's take a look at everything we missed from episode 4 of Overlord. But first, this video is sponsored by Counterside, an upcoming free-to-play mobile RPG that shines with its anime-esque graphics and all-around quality. As the newest game from Korean developers Studio B-Side, not only can you expect Counterside to have some of the best 2D graphics currently available, but it also does well to combine all the best aspects of many other mobile games. It's got an in-depth storyline on par with Fate Grand Order, gameplay mechanics similar to Clash Royale, then real-time PvP events you'd only find in games like Epic 7 or Summoner's Wars. So, rather than those typical turn-based games, Counterside instead combines real-time PvP with the whole strategy and tactics of character placement. Plus, with different classes like Counter, Soldier, and Ship, you can really experiment with all sorts of different concepts and strategies. That said, while this is in fact a gacha game, Counterside is extremely generous with the amount of free gacha pulls it gives. Like, just for the launch of the game alone, not only will you be given 160 free gachas from the first event, but you can also use this coupon code to gain several in-game rewards as well. So, if you're looking for a new anime-style mobile game that just oozes with quality, then I highly recommend using the link in the description to pre-register for Counterside today. But now, let's get back to the video. Episode 4, The Ruler of Death, covering chapters 4 and 5 from Volume 1 of the light novel. One of the key things I forgot to mention in the last cut content was the actual reason behind why Ainz decided to become an adventurer. You see, to say it was to only gather more information would really only be telling you half the story. What the anime leaves out is the objective that led him to this goal in the first place, a motive which yet again relates to his extremely cautious nature. So, the thing that Ainz had come to realize was that the common sense he had picked up from his previous world was completely different from the common sense that existed in this new one. Whatever laws he believed to govern the world of Earth could very well be different from the laws that governed here. Point in case, despite Ainz hearing Japanese from the people he talked to, the lip movements they were making indicated that that wasn't what they were speaking. Then, just the very concept of magic being reality was yet another aspect which indicated things were different now. As for how much different, well, that's what Ainz was trying to find out. By not knowing what others considered to be common sense, the chances of him committing a fatal error would certainly be increased. Thus the reason he knew he needed to move to a city. He understood that in order to learn the common sense he lacked, he needed to examine a large number of models. Now, a key moment that relates all the way to where we are in Season 3 is the establishment of the plan that would continue to guide his actions. An intricate plot intended to attract the attention of any potential Yggdrasil players. This wasn't just to spread the good word of Ainz Gon, but it also entailed becoming cooperators with one of the 3 superpowers. By becoming allies with the Kingdom, Empire, or Theocracy, not only could Ainz maintain Nazarick's own self-governance, but the path to obtain information would be significantly easier. Plus, so long as the relative strength of each country remained a mystery, no significant action could be taken. There was too much risk in making big plays when not knowing exactly what he was up against. That being the case, Ainz wasn't about to roll over and become some nation's pet either. He was more interested in displaying his power to each of them than deciding which he would join in accordance with whoever treated him best. Just like how it was when finding a job, he would make connections when the time was right, then leverage said connections to figure out which would benefit him the most. That was the core of the master plan he'd come up with. The only problem was that the timing of making those connections was everything. Should he rush into a situation that he wasn't fully prepared for, then it was very likely the other party would end up taking advantage of him. Thus the spectacular result we get at the end of Season 3. Now, if we fast forward to the very beginning of Episode 4, the group we see here was an elite squad from the Slane Theocracy, a small unit whose purpose was to carry out only the most illegal of activities. That being the case, it was only natural for this Spec Ops unit to consist of only the most elite soldiers. Not only did each member have to be capable of casting the highest tier faith magic a normal caster could attain, but they also needed to be in peak physical and mental condition. It was a very tight set of restrictions that ensured only the Theocracy's best could join. The reason they were struggling with this mission in particular, though, was because the Sunlight Scripture they represented mainly specialized in extermination missions. They didn't usually go on covert manhunts for specific soldiers, but instead went around wiping out demi-human villages. That was them following the scripture of the god they worshipped. So, after having let Gazef get away for the third time now, many members started to think that this job would have been better for one of the other 6 scripture squads. Specifically the Black Scripture and its whole unit of hero-level members, or perhaps the Windflower Scripture and its casters. With a squad as powerful as the Black, even the mighty Gazef would find himself struggling to escape from them. Unfortunately for the Sunlight, though, the Black Scripture was currently preparing for the Catastrophe Dragonlord's resurrection, while the Windflower Scripture was chasing a traitor, both of which were top-secret missions that couldn't be disclosed to just anyone. So, as the Sunlight's captain considered his next available moves, he began to ponder the reason for the Theocracy wanting Gazef dead in the first place. There seemed to be much more to it than just taking out a strong piece from the board. If you consider how the kingdom was currently locked in a power struggle, you start to realize just how big of an impact Gazef's presence has on it. As the strongest member on the king's side of the conflict, there was no way the opposing nobles would do anything while he was there to resist them. Even with the Slane Theocracy manipulating the nobles from the shadows, they were well aware Gazef was far too strong for them, especially when equipped with the kingdom's 5 treasures. If the Theocracy could somehow remove this trump card from play though, then the kingdom would become much more susceptible to the ideology they were trying to instill through the nobles. You see, the Slane Theocracy was of the mindset that all humans needed to stick together. In a world filled with non-humans and monsters, the Theocracy felt unity as a species was the only way to move forward. Because their god and its teachings insisted on humanity's supremacy, the Slane Theocracy was doing everything it could to get other human nations to walk the same path as them, even if it meant attempting something like this. Now, normally a mission like this would be considered impossible, but with Gazef not currently wearing the kingdom's 5 treasures, the Sunlight Scripture believed this to be their only opportunity. I mean, just one of these 5 pieces of equipment would have made the task significantly harder. Like, the gauntlets would have made him never get fatigued, while the amulet would have provided a constant source of healing. The sword was enchanted to the point where it could cut through anything, while the armor provided one of the most broken buffs of all. Not only was it crafted using the hardest metal in existence, but it also ensured its wearer wouldn't die when receiving a fatal critical hit, kinda like how the Guardian Angel item from League of Legends worked. So, if Gazef was equipped with all this, then the Sunlight Scripture knew that they wouldn't have stood a chance against him. They honestly didn't think that any human would. Fortunately for them though, they were able to use their influence with the nobles and have his equipment stripped from him. And because of that, they were now highly confident that they could beat him, especially since they had the option to put to use one of their own country's sacred treasures. What this item was one of only 3 types of non-standard magic items, extremely rare treasures left behind from the conquerors of eras past. The most recent were the relics of the 8 kings of avarice, which were once used to rapidly dominate the continent over 500 years ago. Before that were the hidden treasures of the Dragonlords, powerful artifacts said to be crafted from the most potent dragon magic. Then the rulers before them were the 6 gods who now make up the foundations of the Slane Theocracy's religion. All powerful entities from over 1200 years ago, which put to use a small collection of sacred treasures, one of which the Sunlight Scripture was now ready to use against Gazef. Before they would bring out that though, the first monsters they summoned were angels, creatures from another world that the Slane Theocracy believed to serve their gods. They definitely weren't enough to beat Gazef alone, but they were certainly troublesome enough to make him worry. Thus the reason he would try to recruit Ainz here. Something the anime didn't quite show us though was the incredible foresight of Gazef to realize Ainz wasn't someone to be messed with. You see, Gazef did suggest he could invoke royal law and force Ainz to fight, but every part of his trusted intuition told him not to. Just the fact he was in control of an undead knight was more than enough to indicate Ainz's magic was unfathomable. He wasn't entirely sure how powerful it was, but he knew that opposing Ainz here was the worst mistake he could make right now. So rather than force this topic any further, Gazef instead proceeded like how we saw in the anime, eventually leading to his departure for battle shortly after. Now, while most of this was pretty much the same, there was a bit more to be said about Gazef himself, specifically regarding how he fought. It was through his sheer power of will that Gazef was able to push his body beyond its limits and reach a level of power that very few were capable of. He had achieved the level of hero and started using multiple martial arts at once. One was to boost his strength, the next to boost his mind, another to increase his magic defense, then one to enchant his weapon. The rest were spent on whatever offensive martial arts he was casting at the time. At first, this was enough to handle the barrage of angels coming at him, but because he didn't have the gauntlets which prevented fatigue, eventually Gazif's exhaustion would start to get the better of him. His arms were becoming heavy and movements becoming sluggish. Arts that previously made fighting significantly easier were now only adding to the burden he was feeling. But even so, Gazif would continue to use every ounce of his energy to defy the opponent standing in front of him. It was an incredibly tense moment that really highlighted exactly the type of person he was. Fast forward to when he was teleported away, and that's when we get to the first scene depicting just how badass Ainz is. I mean, for a caster such as himself to appear face to face with a larger number of enemies, well, that just went to show exactly how confident he was. He had even done the courtesy of telling them he wouldn't have shown up unless he was 100% certain of his victory. Of course, that was rather hard for the Sunlight Scripture to believe, but considering his lofty conviction and oppressive aura, they couldn't fully dismiss the possibility that he could be telling the truth. So, the first thing that led them closer to that belief was the bewildering feat of him picking up the two angels. Yes, surviving their attack was one thing, but to pick up in each hand a summon that weighed more than a heavily armored adult human male, well, that was a feat which was borderline incomprehensible. Perhaps a well-built warrior who had spent their entire life training could eventually be able to do it, but the person in front of them was supposed to be a caster. He was supposed to be someone who had spent their entire life increasing their wisdom and magical energy, not a person who could do more than what even the most physically fit warriors would struggle to accomplish. What hammered home just how outmatched the Theocracy was, though, was the single spell Ainz had cast to wipe out all 40 of their angels. This was a truly unfathomable feat of power that not even the Black Scripture could pull off. Many refused to believe it, but it was now perfectly clear that they were fighting someone who was at least as strong as they were. If they actually went and thought about the situation a little bit more though, then they would have easily realized that Ainz was even more powerful. You see, sure, a Black Scripture member would also be able to take on all those angels, but the true feat was having done so with a single spell. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in the Black Scripture who was able to do the same, and that was the key thing the Sunlight Scripture refused to acknowledge. If they did, then they would have no choice but to come to terms with their opponent being stronger than anything they could even imagine, a realization that was nothing short of a nightmare. Now, what Albedo had used to take out the soldier here was a combination of missile parry and counter arrow, two counterattack skills that proved to be stronger than whatever defensive magic the Theocracy had put in place around them. So, with their defenses now shown to be worthless, the Sunlight Scripture's captain would decide to send in their bigger angel next, the Principality Observation that was previously buffing their defenses. It was while this summon remained stationary that its special ability of increasing defenses remained active. That was the purpose of its observation. It was constantly watching over the battlefield, then providing a defense buff in accordance with what it was seeing. As we saw though, despite this angel having the highest defense out of all the principalities, as well as a buff that came from being summoned by the Sunlight Scripture's captain, it still wasn't enough to get Ainz to even react. What did though was the potential of facing off against a Seraph-class angel, which Ainz knew very well to be the highest rank from Yggdrasil. It was the monster he believed to be sealed away in the crystal, since the Theocracy was boasting how it was the most powerful angel in their possession. He did doubt that it could be Seraph the Empyrean, but the humans summoning it made it seem like it was the ultimate creature known to man. They described it as an angel sealed away from over 200 years ago that was well known to be capable of wiping out entire cities. Of course, what Ainz saw instead was a measly Dominion authority whose limit was a mere 7th tier spell. A level of magic far beyond what any human was capable, but still not enough to do significant damage. So, as soon as Ainz had once again come out unscathed, the captain had no choice but to once again reevaluate what he was up against. To him, the only people capable of fighting against high-level angels were the 6 gods, the kings of dragons, then the evil spirits which once brought calamity. Since the 6 gods were the beings he worshipped, and the Dragon Lords a completely different race, the only conclusion to be made was that Ainz was an evil spirit, demonic entities who were previously sealed away by the 13 heroes. Then, when Ainz had defeated the angel with a single spell, that's when the Sunlight Scripture knew for certain that they were up against an anomaly. No existence they've ever heard or read about came even close to the one that they were dealing with here. Whatever this Ainz Ulgon was, it possessed a level of power that shouldn't even exist. leaving the Sunlight Scripture no choice but to resign to their fate. But yeah, that's pretty much it for episode 4. Just like with the others, I hope you were able to learn a lot more about the story of Overlord. Now, since I did miss last week, I do want to thank everyone who supported the channel through the new Super Thanks feature. Your generous support of the content really is greatly appreciated. So, for any of you that want your name shown at the end of the next video, feel free to leave a Super Thanks comment yourself. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Counterside once again for sponsoring this video. The highly polished live 2D graphics, along with the intricately designed OSTs, are honestly some of the best that I've come across. So, if you're looking for an inspired new mobile game to play, then I can't recommend enough using the link in the description to pre-register for this one. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!